In just 47 seconds, Pierce Brosnan would deliver a verbal takedown so devastating that it would leave Lorraine Kelly speechless, her carefully constructed television persona crumbling before millions of viewers. What started as seemingly pleasant morning television banter would explode into the most explosive confrontation in daytime TV history, with accusations flying, voices raised, and reputations shattered. This is what happened when Britain's most beloved Bond met morning television's most ruthless interrogator. The tension was palpable from the moment Pierce Brosnan walked onto the brightly lit set. His usual charm seemed forced, his smile not quite reaching his eyes as he settled into the infamous guest chair. Lorraine Kelly, perched behind her desk like a predator sizing up prey, wore her signature saccharine grin, the same smile that had lulled countless celebrities into a false sense of security before she struck with surgical precision. "Pierce, lovely to have you back," Lorraine cooed, her Scottish accent dripping with manufactured warmth. "You're looking absolutely wonderful for someone who's been through such a difficult time recently." The comment hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Brosnan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his fingers gripping the arm of his chair. The difficult time she referenced was his recent legal battle with a British tabloid over privacy violations, a deeply personal matter involving his family that had dragged on for months. "Thank you, Lorraine," Pierce replied, his voice carefully measured. "Though I'm here to discuss my new film project, not my private affairs." Kelly's eyes gleamed with predatory interest. This was exactly the response she'd been hoping for. Resistance. Nothing made for better television than a celebrity trying to maintain control of the narrative while she systematically dismantled their defenses. "Oh, but Pierce," she continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "surely you understand that our viewers are concerned about you. The stories in the press have been quite revealing. Your wife Keely's health struggles, the children being photographed without consent. It must be absolutely devastating for the family." The camera zoomed in on Brosnan's face, capturing the moment his diplomatic facade began to crack. His nostrils flared slightly, and for a split second, the steely determination that had made him such a convincing action hero flickered across his features. "Lorraine," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I came here in good faith to promote a film that employs hundreds of people. I didn't come here to have my family's pain exploited for your ratings." The audience fell silent. Even the production crew seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere. Kelly, however, was just getting started. She thrived on these moments, the point where her guests realized they weren't in control anymore. "But Pierce, darling," she pressed on, her tone becoming more aggressive despite maintaining that insufferable smile, "you can't expect to live in the public eye and then cry foul when the public shows interest. Some might say you're being a bit hypocritical. Wouldn't you agree?" That was the moment, the precise second, when Pierce Brosnan decided he'd had enough of Lorraine Kelly's theatrical cruelty disguised as journalism. His hands slowly unclenched from the chair arms, and he leaned back, studying her with the cold calculation of a man who'd spent decades dealing with real threats, not morning television bullies. "Hypocritical?" he repeated slowly, his Irish accent becoming more pronounced as his anger built. "Tell me, Lorraine, when did asking for basic human decency become hypocritical? When did protecting one's children from harassment become a character flaw?" Kelly sensed she was losing control of the narrative, something she absolutely could not allow to happen on her own show. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she forced it back into place. But that brief slip revealed something ugly underneath the carefully crafted persona. "Now, Pierce, there's no need to get defensive," she said, her voice taking on a condescending tone that made several audience members visibly uncomfortable. "I'm simply asking the questions that everyone else is thinking. Isn't that what good journalism is about?" "Good journalism?" Brosnan's voice rose slightly, drawing sharp looks from the production team. "Is that what you call ambushing guests with personal tragedies for entertainment value? Is that your definition of journalistic integrity, Lorraine?" The atmosphere in the studio had become electric. Crew members were exchanging worried glances, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Kelly's producer could be seen frantically gesturing from behind the cameras, but Lorraine was too focused on her prey to notice. "I think you're overreacting, Pierce," she said, her mask slipping further as irritation crept into her voice. "This is live television. People expect honesty. not carefully rehearsed soundbites about upcoming projects. They want to see the real you. The real me? Brosnan stood up slightly in his chair, his considerable presence suddenly dominating the small studio space. The real me is a man who spent his entire career treating people with respect and dignity. The real me is someone who believes that basic human decency shouldn't be sacrificed on the altar of morning television ratings. Kelly's smile was now completely gone, replaced by a look of barely contained hostility. This was not going according to her script, and in her world, that was unforgivable. She was used to celebrities rolling over, accepting her provocations with sheepish grins and apologetic explanations. Pierce Brosnan was proving to be a very different kind of guest. "Well, perhaps if you'd been more forthcoming from the beginning," she snapped, her Scottish accent becoming sharper with anger. "We wouldn't need to press so hard for answers. Some of us have a job to do, Pierce." The insult hung in the air like smoke from a fired gun, suggesting that Brosnan wasn't professional, wasn't doing his job by refusing to exploit his family's pain for her entertainment. It was a bridge too far, and everyone in the studio knew it. Pierce Brosnan slowly rose from his chair, his full height casting a shadow across Lorraine Kelly's desk. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but carried the weight of decades in an industry where he'd learned to spot predators from a mile away. "Some of us," he said, his words cutting through the studio silence like a blade, "know the difference between doing a job and being a vulture." But Kelly wasn't finished. In fact, she was just getting started, and what she was about to say would cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Kelly's face had turned a mottled shade of red, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the raw anger beneath. She leaned forward across her desk, pointing a manicured finger directly at Brosnan's chest with the precision of a weapon. "A vulture?" she hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper that the studio microphones picked up with crystal clarity. "At least I'm honest about what I do for a living, Pierce. Unlike some people who built their entire career playing pretend and now want to lecture the rest of us about integrity." The words hit the studio like a physical blow. Several audience members gasped audibly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the seasoned camera operators seemed stunned by the naked hostility radiating from their usually composed host. Brosnan's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. "Playing pretend?" he repeated slowly, his voice carrying a warning that anyone with sense would have heeded. "Is that what you think acting is, Lorraine? Is that your professional assessment of a craft that's employed millions and brought joy to billions?" "Oh, please," Kelly scoffed, her mask now completely abandoned. "Don't give me that sanctimonious bullshit about craft and art. You made your fortune pretending to be someone you're not, and now you want to play the wounded artist when real journalists ask real questions." The studio fell into a shocked silence so complete that the hum of the overhead lighting became audible. Production assistants were frozen at their posts, unsure whether to cut to commercial or let the carnage continue. Kelly's producer was frantically making throat-cutting gestures from behind the cameras, but she was too far gone to notice or care. "Real journalists?" Brosnan's voice rose slightly, finally showing the first cracks in his legendary composure. "Is that what you call yourself, Lorraine? A real journalist? Because from where I'm sitting, you look more like a parasite feeding off other people's misery." Kelly shot up from her chair, her hands slamming down on the desk with enough force to rattle the coffee mugs. "How dare you come onto my show and insult me? This is my studio, my program, and if you can't handle a few tough questions, maybe you should stick to your little movie sets where everyone kisses your arse." The profanity crackled through the studio's sound system, causing several audience members to cover their mouths in shock. This was morning television's equivalent of a nuclear detonation, the careful facade of civilized discourse, obliterated in favor of raw, unfiltered hostility. Brosnan stood to his full height, his presence suddenly dominating the entire space. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet intensity of a man who'd reached his absolute limit. "You want to know what I can't handle, Lorraine?" he said, his words cutting through the tension like a surgeon's scalpel. "I can't handle watching someone who calls herself a journalist deliberately trying to cause pain to my family for the sake of entertainment. I can't handle the way you smile while you twist the knife." "Your family?" Kelly laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitter contempt. "Your family chose to live in the spotlight, Pierce. They chose the money, the fame, the lifestyle? You can't have it both ways. You can't cash the checks and then complain when the bill comes due. Something dark and dangerous flashed across Brosnan's face. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, everyone in the studio held their breath, wondering if Britain's most famous secret agent was about to demonstrate some very real combat skills. "My children," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout, "are not commodities for your consumption. They are human beings who deserve basic dignity and respect, something you clearly wouldn't understand." Kelly's eyes blazed with fury. She'd built her career on breaking celebrities down, on finding their weak spots and exploiting them for maximum dramatic effect. Pierce Brosnan's protective instincts regarding his family weren't just a weakness to be exploited. They were a direct challenge to her authority in her own domain. "Don't you dare lecture me about dignity," she snarled, all pretense of professionalism abandoned. "You've spent decades parading around in expensive suits, playing spy games for children, and now you want to act like some kind of moral authority? You're a bloody actor, Pierce, not a saint." The insult reverberated through the studio like a gunshot. Brosnan's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were physically restraining himself from saying something that would end careers and destroy relationships permanently. "And you're a bloody bully," he finally replied, his voice carrying decades of controlled rage. "Hiding behind a television camera and a fake smile while you systematically destroy people for sport. At least when I played a villain, everyone knew it was just a performance." Kelly's face contorted with rage. She'd been called many things over her career: aggressive, pushy, even ruthless. But never had anyone dared to call her a bully to her face on live television. The accusation struck at the very core of her carefully constructed public image. "Get out," she hissed, pointing toward the studio exit with a trembling finger. "Get the hell off my show right now." But Brosnan wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. He took a step closer to her desk, his presence now completely overwhelming the small space between them. "No, Lorraine," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd faced down real threats in both fiction and reality. "I think it's time someone told you exactly what they think of your pathetic excuse for journalism." The confrontation had reached its boiling point, and what happened next would be talked about for years to come. Brosnan stepped closer to Kelly's desk, his eyes blazing with an intensity that made seasoned crew members step back involuntarily. The man who had portrayed some of cinema's most dangerous characters was about to demonstrate that his real-life presence was far more formidable than any fictional role. "You want to know what I think of your journalism, Lorraine?" he said, his voice carrying the quiet menace of a man who'd finally had enough. "I think you're a coward hiding behind a television camera, picking on people who can't fight back because it makes you feel powerful." Kelly's face went pale, then flushed crimson again. "How dare you?" "I'm not finished." Brosnan cut her off with surgical precision, his voice rising for the first time during the entire confrontation. "You sit there in your little studio kingdom, thinking you're untouchable, thinking you can say whatever you want about people's families, their pain, their struggles, and there will be no consequences." The studio audience was completely silent now, riveted by the raw display of controlled fury unfolding before them. Several people had their phones out, recording what they instinctively knew would become television history. "You've built your entire career on exploitation," Brosnan continued, his words hitting Kelly like physical blows. "You prey on vulnerability, you feast on human suffering, and you call it entertainment. Well, congratulations, Lorraine. You've finally met someone who's willing to call you what you really are." Kelly tried to interrupt, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. But Brosnan wasn't giving her the chance to regain control of the narrative she'd lost the moment she'd attacked his family. "You're not a journalist," he said, his voice dropping back to that dangerous whisper that seemed to carry more weight than any shout. "You're not even a decent human being. You're a professional sadist who's convinced herself that cruelty is a career choice." "Security!" Kelly finally managed to scream, her voice cracking with rage and humiliation. "Get security in here now." But the damage was already done, and everyone in the studio knew it. Brosnan straightened his jacket with deliberate calm, his movements controlled and precise. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute moral authority. "You know what the difference is between us, Lorraine?" he asked, his tone now conversational, almost gentle. When I played a villain, it was just a job. When you destroy people's lives for ratings, it's who you really are. Two security guards appeared at the studio entrance, looking uncertain and uncomfortable. They'd been called to remove Pierce Brosnan, one of Britain's most beloved actors, from a television studio where he'd been invited as a guest. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on anyone present. Kelly pointed a shaking finger at Brosnan. "Get him out of here. Get him out now." But Brosnan was already moving toward the exit, his dignity intact despite the chaos surrounding him. He paused at the edge of Kelly's desk, looking down at her with something that might have been pity. "You know, Lorraine," he said quietly, just loud enough for the studio microphones to pick up, "I've met real villains in my time. People who would do anything for money or power. But even they had the decency to admit what they were. You're worse than any of them because you actually believe your own bullshit." Kelly shot to her feet again, her chair spinning wildly behind her. "You arrogant bastard! You think you're better than everyone else because you wear expensive suits and pretend to save the world?" Brosnan turned back to face her one final time, and when he smiled, it was the same charming expression that had made him famous. But now it carried an edge that made everyone in the studio understand why he'd been so convincing as a dangerous man. "No, Lorraine," he said, his Irish accent thick with contempt. "I don't think I'm better than everyone else. I just know I'm better than you." The words hung in the studio air like the aftermath of an explosion. Kelly's face cycled through several shades of red and purple, her mouth working soundlessly as she struggled to find a response that could salvage what remained of her dignity. "Get out!" she finally shrieked, her voice breaking completely. "Get out of my studio!" "Gladly," Brosnan replied, turning toward the exit with unhurried grace. "I wouldn't want to spend another second breathing the same air as someone who feeds off other people's pain." He walked toward the studio doors with the measured pace of a man who knew he'd won a battle he'd never wanted to fight. Behind him, Kelly continued screaming, her words becoming increasingly incoherent as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. As Brosnan reached the studio exit, he paused and looked back over his shoulder. The camera caught his profile perfectly. The face of a man who'd just delivered the most devastating takedown in morning television history. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, addressing the stunned audience directly, "I apologize that you had to witness this display. You deserved better than watching someone's career end in real time." And with that, Pierce Brosnan walked out of the studio, leaving behind a host whose carefully constructed image lay in smoking ruins, and an audience that had just witnessed the most explosive confrontation in daytime television history. Kelly stood alone behind her desk, her chest heaving with rage and humiliation, as the cameras continued to roll and capture every moment of her complete and utter destruction. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Lorraine Kelly's ragged breathing and the distant closing of the studio door as Pierce Brosnan disappeared into television legend.